What's up, everybody? Welcome into this Wednesday edition of the Pack-A-Day podcast here on YouTube. I'm your host, Andy Herman. We are one day away from Thanksgiving football, 3 games in a row. We get a little bit of Mike McCarthy. We get a little bit of Ravens-Steelers on Thursday Night Football, which should be a really interesting matchup. I know it's not the most ideal matchups throughout the day, but still, we are very close to 3 games on Thanksgiving. Maybe tomorrow I'll get to some of my famous Thanksgiving food takes, but for right now, I want to jump into the defense's performance in Week 11 against the Indianapolis Colts. And interestingly enough, this is one of my higher graded games of the season for the defense, which for me is the absolute worst because that means I have to work a little bit extra to actually defend myself. It'd be very nice if when the team looks awful and gives up a ton of points, if they grade awful, that way I can just, be done with it. And if they play great, they grade great, so I can be done with it. But when those two things don't always match up, that means a little extra time, effort, and energy for me because I have to explain to you exactly why that happened. But I think there's a lot of reasons this week why the grades didn't necessarily match what we saw on tape and with so many points allowed. So let me start by going through just a few of those. First of all, Green Bay's defense was not clutch in big situations, and there were multiple big third down opportunities, fourth down opportunities where Green Bay could not come up with big plays. And, granted, those plays were graded negatively because of that, but there were a lot of really good plays that set up some of those third and long and fourth down situations. And there were, like I said, a lot of those that, there were very positive plays, some really great plays by Rashawn Gary, some really good plays by the safeties in this game. Zadarius Smith had some flash plays. Kenny Clark played fantastic. So there was some really good play out on the field. In fact, if you go back and watch, I would say this is the game where the team rallied to the football, better than they had certainly in most of the previous weeks. So there was a lot of good on tapes, but they came up short in clutch situations. So you ended up with a lot of well-graded plays, but a handful of ones that just in clutch situations didn't come up the best. Another reason this game graded better is you had 2 really big turnovers in this game. Raven Green forcing the fumble was a really big play, as well as the Billy Wynn tip pass that resulted in the Christian Kirksey interception. So some really high scores, specifically on the Raven Green forced fumble. That was a really nice play by him. Number 3 reason, I am grading the players. And I am not grading the scheme. I'm not grading Mike Pettine. And I think we can all see, and I think everyone's well aware, that there were some deficiencies in the scheme over the course of this season, really, but certainly in this game as well. Some of the really soft coverages on third down, some of the plays where, you're 15 yards behind, but, you're giving up a 12-yard completion, forcing a fourth down against a team that loves to go for it on fourth down. Just those sorts of things in this game. Mike Pettine did very little to scheme players to get to the quarterback, to be aggressive. And that's one of my biggest issues right now with this defense is it is soft by design. And yes, there's plays where they blitz. Yes, there's plays where they play more aggressive, but way too many plays with off coverage, soft coverage. And at some point, you've got to let your players go out and compete. And this is a team right now that when they're playing more aggressive, when they're bringing players, when they're playing press man-to-man, I see a much better defense, a defense that's more engaged. And there was just too much off coverage in this game, which is another reason why, again, I'm not grading the scheme. And in some of those situations, when you're playing 15 yards back and you allow a 12-yard completion, I'm not knocking the players on those plays. And yes, there was the play, the one I'm specifically talking about, the 15 yards where they're 15 yards back and allow the 12-yard completion, 13-yard completion for a first down. There were a handful of players that were too far back, which Matt LaFleur mentioned, and those were graded negatively, but there's just way too much of that. It's one thing if Jair Alexander or Kevin King, Chandon Sullivan is in man-to-man coverage and they get beat on a double move and give up a 65-yard touchdown or something, right? But that's going to be a huge negative. But if you're naturally playing 15 yards back and the guy curls at 12 yards, they make an easy completion and you go make the tackle, that's 12, 13 yards, and there's not really any fault for the player. So part of this was absolutely scheme. Another thing, you had a handful of players grade really, really positively in this game, but you had 6 players that graded in the negative. So when you have 6 players that didn't hold up their end of the bargain, there's different areas of the field that you can attack, and ultimately that can cost you throughout the course of the game. There was also a very huge negative for Preston Smith, and when you have a guy that's playing 75 snaps in a game and he's really struggling and not making an impact and is kind of a liability out there, honestly, he's kind of this year's version of Jimmy Graham, if we're being real, that's going to be an issue. And you're ultimately going to give up some points and some big plays, because at times it's almost like you're playing 10 on 11 because you've got one guy out there that's not holding up his end of the bargain. It was a very negative grade for this week for Preston Smith. Consistency is another. Matt LaFleur mentioned this. So Zadarius Smith is a great example of this in this game. Handful of really big plays for Zadarius Smith, but 2-3 plays where he sucked in on a pass play and they ran right around him. There was a reverse that had happened. There was kind of a counter play that happened, and those sort of plays. And it's just stacking those plays together, and it's not letting a couple of those plays here and there show up on tape. And what happens is you can have some of these players. Raven Green's another great example, who ends up with a very positive grade, rightfully so, because of his big forced fumble. But if you take that forced fumble away, he would have been the 7th player that graded in the negative. So, just some things like that again can add up, where you end up with some, positive grades at the end of the day, but it doesn't necessarily result in winning football games. Another issue here, blown coverages. There were the 2 big plays on crossing patterns where Michael Pittman Jr. came wide open on a crossing pattern, one on a touchdown, another on, I'd say, maybe 20, 25-yard gain. It's just a blown coverage, or, nobody in that area. And again, I'm not going to grade something if I can't tell who was at fault on a specific play. And some of those blown coverages, it's really tough to tell. On the first one, was Chandon Sullivan supposed to blitz? It looks like it. I think so. But usually Zadarius Smith, or the lineman on that side, is going to pinch in to give kind of the corner a free alley. Zadarius Smith didn't do that on that play. It looked like Adrian Amos was probably responsible for the flat. Everyone else is playing zone. He kind of goes back in man coverage where there's 2 other defenders. Could have been Adrian Amos on that play. Some of those things are tough to tell, but blown coverages was another huge part of this that didn't necessarily affect some of the positive grades in this game. And then the last thing, and it's really an important one, and it's worth noting, is there were on multiple occasions plays where the Packers did a lot of really good things on defense, and the Colts just executed to perfection. There are a handful of plays where Rashawn Gary, Zadarius Smith, Kenny Clark got like almost immediate pressure, and the wide receiver was barely open, but Phillip Rivers was able to complete the pass. There were plays where they just schemed up a really great play against a defense. Ben Fennell always says this, and he's 1,000,000% correct. Every defense has a weakness. Whether you're in cover 2, cover 3, cover 4, man-to-man, every defense has a weakness. And if you call the right play against that specific defense, you're going to end up with an advantage, and sometimes you have to tip your cap to the offense. And it doesn't necessarily mean, especially when you're in zone defense, it doesn't mean that Jair or King or Savage or Amos or anyone did anything wrong. Sometimes you call cover 2, and the offense calls a cover 2 beater, and they beat it. And it's as simple as that. And there were a handful of plays where Green Bay played very sound defense, and the Colts either just had the right call or they just executed just a tad bit better. And again, so there's millionaires on the other side of the field too that get paid to execute and play at a very high level. And I thought in this game there were some plays like that where the Packers had good defense, did their job, did what they were supposed to do, and the Colts just converted on some big plays. So tip your cap to the Colts. There was a lot more positives to take away from this game than I had expected on the defensive side of the ball. This was close to being an impressive performance from the defense. Just, man, if they could just get off the field on some of those big 3rd and long situations. They had them in the first half. They had them in the second half. They had some 4th downs they could have got off the field on. It's those clutch situations that really, really cost the Green Bay Packers, specifically on defense in this game. But you had a couple turnovers. You had some pressure. You had some guys grade really, really well. Some things I'm excited about, but they got to get better in those clutch situations. All right, with that being said, let me go over my top 3 and bottom 3 graded players from the game. Number 1, top graded player, Kenny Clark. I thought he was phenomenal in this game. This was the real Kenny Clark. We got the real deal. Some of the times he was beating Quentin Nelson across from him. Did a lot of work against the center. I think Ryan Kelly and the other guard, I think Glowinski. He did some really good work against those two, but even got to Quentin Nelson on a couple occasions. Got his first sack of the season. Really stout against the run. They doubled him a lot, and he just would not move. Just a really, really great game from Kenny Clark. And then my other 2, Darnell Savage and Adrian Amos. I thought both of them played great. I mentioned the Amos play from before where it's possible that he was at fault, but potentially not going in the flat on that one play. Outside of that, both of these safeties were really good. In fact, I think you can argue this is the best that they played as a tandem, and I think this is Darnell Savage's best game of his career. He came up, he was flying to the football, and if there's one real positive over the course of the last 2-3 weeks that I can take away from this defense, it seems like Mike Pettin and this defense has finally figured out how to correctly use Darnell Savage more towards the line of scrimmage, more in the box, use Adrian Amos more as that single high and kind of your deep safety. That's been working out much, much better. Darnell Savage has been much more involved. He's flying around to the football. He's playing with great instinct. He's not thinking quite as much. This has been a much better Darnell Savage over the course of the last few weeks. And I thought this was one of his best games of the season. All right, on the flip side, I already mentioned my by far worst graded player in this game is Preston Smith. No reason at this point that Rashawn Gary should not be playing ahead of him. We talk about, and Ross Uglum talked about this on the Pack-A-Day podcast, and him and I have talked about this as well. One of the biggest differences between the Packers offense last year and this year is that two players who were borderline horrible a season ago, Jimmy Graham and Geronimo Allison, are no longer on the team. And filling them in with even just replacement level solid players, and I think you can argue Robert Tonyan has been better than average. I think he's been good, and I think especially when Alan Lazard and MVS and Adams are on the field all at the same time, those are huge upgrades from Graham and Allison to really MVS and Robert Tonyan. And that's a huge reason the offense is doing so better, is because you're not playing with 9 guys. You're not playing with 2 guys who weren't holding up their end of the bargain. And on defense this year, one of the reasons you're struggling is because for a good chunk of this year, Dean Lowry and Preston Smith are kind of that Geronimo Allison and Jimmy Graham so far this year. Those are 2 players that have to step up. And Preston Smith, making a lot of money, looked really good a season ago, has not looked the same this season. Something's got to give. And if not, then it's time to play Rashawn Gary a hell of a lot more than what Preston Smith's getting played right now. You can't play 75 snaps and have that type of impact. And maybe it's the amount of snaps that he's playing. Maybe he needs to play a little bit less, maybe get around the 40-45 mark, and maybe he can play a little bit better. But something's got to give. They got to change something there. The other 2, Kevin King was the second lowest graded player. Wasn't a horrible game. I think just working off a little bit of rust after missing some time. Definitely some man-to-man coverage where he got beat a little bit. Didn't get thrown at a ton, but there were definitely some plays where he got beat, would probably like to have back. And then Christian Kirksey also made some nice plays in this game. There was one play where he stacked a guard and shed him and made a play. It was gorgeous. You don't see very many plays like that from Packer linebackers over the course of the last handful plus of years. He made a couple nice plays in this game, but other times blocked too easily. Other times just kind of washed out of the play. Got pancaked once. It wasn't a huge negative, but still a slight negative grade in this game for Christian Kirksey. And then just kind of a bonus one. Player that I came out most encouraged by in this game was Rashawn Gary. I know he was Pro Football Focus's highest rated defender in this game for the Packers. He finished just a little bit below Clark Savage and Amos in this game. Still a very high grade, and just really encouraged what he's been putting on tape. Really learning how to convert speed to power. Not trying to go around the edge and bend quite as much. He's using his raw natural strength. He's going to have to develop a counter because teams are going to start just anchoring and focusing on making sure that they don't, he doesn't bull rush them. But really some steps in the positive direction for Rashawn Gary in this game, and really solid against the run as well. That is going to do it for me. I will be right back here tomorrow, even on Thanksgiving, for an all-new Pack-A-Day podcast right here on YouTube. Make sure to check out Dusty, Steve, and Sarah wherever you get your favorite podcasts. If you haven't yet, if you've just found me on YouTube and you haven't checked out the daily Pack-A-Day podcast 365 days a year on Google Play, iTunes, wherever you get your favorite podcasts, make sure to do that because the entire team does such a tremendous job. And make sure to check out Dusty, Steve, and Sarah today. Thanks for joining me. Thanks for listening. I'll be back tomorrow. And until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.